should someone else take the Polaroid this time?
What happened?
Alex has been, he hasn't had much luck with our Polaroids.
Dude, you are starting to sound like a liability. What is happening?
Welcome back to the Demystified podcast, guys. Today we have a very, very special and unique guest, and someone who we think has a lot to offer, especially for people applying in corporate law. For this episode, we have Divya Deivanayagam, a trainee solicitor in a Silver Circle city law firm. She was also the careers officer at King's College London Law Society, where she has helped many students navigate careers and secure roles in the city in law. She also has a bunch of super interesting experiences which we can get into, including one in AI-powered legal process automation. So without further ado, welcome Divya to the Breaking In podcast.
Thank you.
Okay, so should we start with the story of Divya? You come from Sri Lanka, right? And you moved over to the UK to study.
Yes. So I came here to start law school. First experience of kind of moving away, living abroad. Came here to do law. And at the time it was this is new to me, it's a whole new world. And I was actually a science student in school, and I was already pivoting to a completely new field, switching my brain from kind of the scientific method of thinking to being a humanities degree holder, basically. So yeah, that was a very interesting transition, which I think has kicked off my love for trying to navigate new industries and like push myself out of my comfort zone, and now kind of being a financey but legal zone. But yeah.
How do you feel about switching from science? Would you ever come back there?
I think, do you know what, controversial opinion, but I do believe science is something, it's very useful to have learned from a foundational level onwards, because I think finance, business, and those kind of skills are things you can pick up and teach yourself later on. But science, kind of learning the fundamentals of bio and chemistry and stuff at that schooling level has been very invaluable to me personally. It was tough making the transition to law school, having to think in a very like just completely write essays constantly instead of like solving equations or being like the whole critical thinking was a buzzword that kept being thrown at me, but I was like, what does this mean? And it just takes time to really apply yourself and like transition and develop those skills. But I don't regret doing science. I'm not sure if I'd go back to it, but I did enjoy it at the time, and I think I just wanted something new and different.
Great. Is it fair to say that like people in law in general try to avoid STEM?
Do you know what? That's not true, because to be a lawyer in London or just in the city, especially in this solicitor kind of pathway, we recruit half non-law background graduates. Okay. And it's a thing. And I know certain firms in the city that offer kind of STEM-based training contracts, and they actively recruit STEM students. So I get where you're coming from in terms of the stereotype of we avoid science. But currently in the city, if you look at the trainee solicitor pool, half of us are non-law, and a quarter of those would be STEM students as well. So it's interesting. I think we're looking more for people with different ways of thinking, different perspectives, and we just want to collate all of that and kind of make a more robust legal advice giving kind of world.
That's interesting. I didn't know that STEM students tend to go to law.
Yeah. It's very flexible. I think it's the reason I chose law as a degree as well. There are no subject requirements to pursue it as a degree. Anybody could do law no matter what subject you've done in school. And for me, that represented a lot of possibilities. It was, I want to do something that's so transferable that, because at the time as an 18-year-old, you don't know what you're doing and you don't know where to start with making those decisions. And I just remember thinking, okay, if I had to start somewhere, what's something that will open up more doors for me? And a legal kind of path at that point seemed to make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Can you actually define law? What is it? What does it involve?
I mean, I think at the most basic level, it's the rules that govern us as a society. What I personally find the most appealing is like, I think we all do function within kind of a grey space. Everything is so subjective and fluid, but what the law tries to do is break that up and set it out to be a black and white framework. And I've always found that to be quite interesting. Like, how do you do that? How do you set these boundaries and barriers, make sure everybody follows, but also maintain order? It's kind of bringing order to chaos in a interesting way.
And what does a lawyer do then, if that's law?
I mean, it depends on the type of lawyer you are. We are very client-facing. We're here to help people navigate the law, essentially. We're here to help people get out of their problems, as you see on all the TV shows and movies. All my friends think I'm going to bail them out of jail. That is not what I can do, unfortunately. So I think it depends on the type of law you go into, but it is using the legal framework in whichever industry or specific sector and solving the problems and helping companies or individuals navigate that framework and, use it to their advantage from a commercial perspective, be it like a human rights perspective, whatever it may be. So I think a lawyer uses the law to help people. It's a very utilitarian way of thinking of it, depending on the sector, but generally this is what we do, I'd like to think.
We've been using the word law and lawyer quite loosely.
Yeah.
As you might know, or as you definitely know, in the UK we have two main routes. You can become a solicitor or a barrister, and you're a solicitor.
I am, yeah, that's right.
What made you take the solicitor route as opposed to the barrister route?
And can you tell the difference, please?
Yeah, of course. So being a solicitor is essentially you help clients from like a law firm perspective. So you help them in their negotiations and setting up, the paperwork for major deals, and you do that side of things. Whereas a barrister is someone who conventionally kind of wears the gown and the wig and goes to court, and they do kind of the court-facing dispute resolution. So there are some fundamental differences, starting from, as a barrister, you're technically self-employed in the UK. Like, you're a part of a chamber, but as you grow with experience, barristers are self-employed, whereas solicitors usually work for a firm, a high street firm, a city firm, whatever the scale may be. And the solicitor side of things, I think, has a bit more client relationship management. There's more it's more people-facing, it's more collaborative, and there's more commerciality involved in it. I think you have more access and interaction to the real world, whereas being a barrister is very legalese. It is pulling out that case law book and looking at the precedent and what case, is the point of reference. It is quite heavily the black and white law. I was leaning more towards being a solicitor because, practically speaking, as an international student, I was someone who was looking for sponsorship as well. And in terms of the number of opportunities, pursuing the training contract, which is the qualification pathway for a solicitor, which we'll probably get into, seemed to make more sense for me practically, was the first point. And the second point was also, I loved debating. I did MUN. I love, I'm a qualified mediator. I do like dispute resolution. So I was considering being a barrister, but I think it didn't appeal to me in the way, kind of personally, the way the British system is structured. There seemed to be a few more barriers and obstacles. It was a bit more traditionalist than I would have preferred. And I'm still exploring. I'm still trying to understand what the law has to offer. And I thought the solicitor pathway would still leave more doors open for me. I think that's what I've been trying to do, keep opening more and more doors and have access to more and more opportunities. So I thought this just made sense for me personally.
Great.
And do people normally switch in between those two, or they just stay forever in one of those?
So unfortunately in the UK you have to choose. And this is jurisdiction based. This is a UK specific kind of situation, because, for example, back in Sri Lanka you qualify as both. You just get qualified as a lawyer and you can go to court or work at a law firm. You unfortunately can't toggle between the two because the pathways are quite different. The skills and specialist kind of nature of what you learn along the way is very different. But you can, as a solicitor, gain higher rights and go to court. So it's not that if you are a solicitor, you can only work at a law firm and be at a desk job. You can gain higher rights and go and represent clients in certain courts, and vice versa. But it's not as separate as you think. So, for example, if as a part of the firm I work, if we are part of a big case, we go out to barristers and we work with barristers, and we handle the client relations side, whereas the barrister is the one who rocks up at court and does the representation. But
you're working closely with them throughout, so they're familiar with the case.
Yeah, and it depends. It's on the more contentious kind of work that firms may do. It's not in my day-to-day, this current kind of practice that I'm in, but they do work in tandem. It's never in complete vacuums in an isolated way.
And there are also solicitor advocates, right? Which are kind
of
quasi-barristers.
Yeah, so they're the ones who get the higher rights. That's exactly right. So you can be a solicitor, get higher rights, go to certain courts and do your advocacy if you want to have kind of your suits moment.
Interesting.
Taking a step back, I always saw you in school and you did MUN and you did so well in these kind of things. But was it at what age did you kind of know that this is what you wanted to do? And do you think that I mean, do you think that you do this over the long term as well? Like, is it...
Brief interjection. You guys went to school together, for context. Right?
We went to school together, and
Manu is just my stalker.
yeah,
we did. We go way back before he was this Maversify savant. That's a separate podcast. But very interesting question. And honestly, up until the month before we applied and made our UCAS applications, I was going to do medicine. I had just done sciences all my life, and from where we come from, it's just kind of, okay, you're good at science, it's the logical option. And I had, in my head just built up this, okay, I'll do medicine and I'll be a doctor. Then push comes to shove and you have to make decisions and you have to write up an application. And I was like, is this really what I want to do? And I just had a major reevaluation over summer before we applied. And it was a process of elimination for me. I was like, it's a big commitment. It's an expensive commitment as an international student. And I just didn't see it for myself at all. And that's when this whole, okay, if I don't want to do medicine, do I still want to do science? Do I still want to do an alternate science degree like biotech, biochem, one of the other options? And then there was a part of me that just wanted to explore something new and different, because we didn't really have many different subjects or specialties on offer in school. So I wanted to just get out of that bubble and kind of explore a bit more. So I leaned towards my interest in kind of being an argumentative person, basically. And I was like, okay, what's the most transferable humanity degree that's worth the fees and the expense? And that is how I leaned towards law. It was never like, I've always wanted to be a lawyer and like I had this fight for justice. I've later come to realize that it's actually suited my personality really well. But I think at the time I didn't have the tools or the awareness to really kind of point that out. But I think a part of me has always kind of wanted to do this, because it's not as simple as being like, I chose law because I didn't want to do medicine. I think to do a law degree, you have to have a certain kind of interest and rigor. And, it is one of the more intense degrees as well. So I think I found myself actually quite enjoying, it was a challenge making that transition, but I did find myself enjoying the content and the subject matter. So it's been a journey of like actually trying to be self-critical of my own choices and see, is this really what I want to do? Am I making the right decisions along the way? So it was never like 10-year-old Divya wants to save the world. But yeah.
Do you feel like you get to exercise those skills? Or you said you like debating, for example, you did MUN.
Yeah.
That sounds a lot like what a barrister would say.
Yeah, I know. This was the dilemma at uni as well, but I don't think it's mutually exclusive. Sometimes I sit in on client calls in my daily routine, and there's a certain level of kind of negotiation involved when lawyers are trying to stand by points and they want the best for their client. And it's a bit like debating. You have to use like all those fundamental principles to like make your point in the most diplomatic manner, get the best, serve your client's best interest, but also maintain relations with the other side, maintain kind of client relations. And so I see myself putting into practice those skills. I think they're all transferable and they carry on and trickle through. It may not be in the most conventional, traditional way of I stand up and debate and advocate for a judge, but it manifests itself in a lot of ways, I think, along the way.
Guys, just to shed some more light on the distinction between solicitor and barrister before we move on as well. You mentioned already barristers stand up in court, they wear the gowns, the wigs, and they advocate on behalf of the client.
They wear wigs.
They wear wigs.
Yeah, they do wear wigs.
Oh, I didn't know this.
And if you're a barrister, you belong to a chambers.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, Alex done his research.
As I'm listening to this, I'm realizing there's such like a barrier to entry in terms of like knowledge. Like in my head.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go for it. We're here to debunk all of it.
Yeah. In my head, law is like suit style, Harvey Specter.
Right.
I like this in my head. This is what I know.
Okay.
There's criminal and then there's civil law, and you kind of make that choice at some point in your journey whether you want to be in criminal law, like civil law. And civil law usually involves more money, is what I've heard. You can debunk. And criminal law would be, I mean, for me, it sounds more exciting. And so that's kind of what I know. So I didn't know the whole solicitor barrister distinction. None of that going into this podcast, actually.
This is why the whole a lot of our pop culture references are American point comes into play because it's just the British system is what it is. Actually, studying law in the UK specifically is made the most sense to me because it's the shortest law degree in the world. If you look at other countries, like the predominant kind of options, let's say we were comparing Australia, the UK and the US, the big ones. In both Australia and the US, you have to do a degree before you do law. Law is a specialty. So a lot of people in the US do poli-sci first as their undergraduate. They do that for 3-4 years and then they specialize and go to law school. It's so if you went to law school in the US, your peers would be much older because they've done a degree before. And the same goes for Australia. The UK for me was that one country you can dive straight into a law degree, which took only 3 years. And then beyond that, qualifying into either a solicitor or a barrister role would take a year because the qualification exam for both you can do in a year or 6 months. There are options. So the UK pathway is very different to what we're seeing on Suits.
And you bring up a good point, Manu. There are different areas of law as well, right? So criminal, civil,
and those
commercial.
exist. Those still exist. It's just that when you do the law degree, there are requirements to cover all bases. So it's compulsory to do certain modules, which are the basics, like fundamentals, like contract law, property law. We do criminal law. It's a compulsory module. All of us do it. And then as you near the end of your degree, you can dabble. So I did modules like environmental law. I did modules like IP law. And that's where you can go and kind of dabble in specialties. But then it's only when you pursue like your job is when you dive into specializing in practice. Because law in university as theory and law in practice are very different. Is something I'd also like to point out. Like the way my legal degree was structured versus the practice I'm in are very different to each other in that as a law student, you're often looking at the law as it stands, critiquing it, kind of thinking and debating the law. Whereas when you're in practice, you're putting it into practice. You're like, how can I use the law to help the client? How can I, be flexible, be creative with using the existing framework to help someone? So, yeah.
It seems like there's actually like things that you should know. Like,
it is technical.
It seems quite technical.
It is technical
Because traditionally we have guests who work in like finance, for example, and in finance, a lot of it is actually learning on the job. You can come from any background. You can come from arts, humanities. You can come from any background, and you can kind of just learn on the job. Whereas in law, now, as you speak about the modules you did, like criminal law, environmental law, I feel like if you are working in like an environmental law practice seat, that you do need some kind of domain specific knowledge.
Yeah.
And you can't just like learn on the job in the same way. So do you agree that there's like a barrier to entry, like someone who did English to move into law?
I mean, objectively speaking, that should make sense. But again, a lot of firms recruit 50-50. If you look at their stats, maybe it's like a bit skewed of like 60-40 of like there's a bit more law background oriented candidates. But I mean, I have non-law peers in my current cohort who perform equally, some of them even better than people who've done law before. I think once you go into practice, so I can only speak for my industry, right, which is very commercially driven. And there is those finance elements of being commercially aware that comes into play. But everyone does. So even the non-law people do a law conversion and they learn all the basic principles of law. So they do like contract law, property law, tort law, all are compulsory modules in 1 year.
Right.
And they get that legal foundation and then they dive in. So you're right in that technically there is a barrier to entry, but that's solved the minute anyone kind of lands a training contract, because you do a GDL and then you come in with, you've done a law conversion and technically that should bring you to the same level as law students who've done a 3-year law degree. And then you all dive in together and there's a lot of training resources involved to build up that knowledge from there on.
Okay. And taking a step back, like a GDL and stuff, like if I'm someone in the audience who's in high school and wants to be a corporate lawyer, what's the clearest pathway in your mind to land into that seat?
Couple of options. If you know law is what you want to doing the law degree, and then you can either do the LPC if you want to be a solicitor or the BPTC if you want to be a barrister. There's a new route in the UK called the SQE, which is where you do the course but also like study alongside of it in like chunks. It's a new structure. I personally didn't do it, therefore I'm not fully aware of it, and they're still rolling it out. We're in the second year of them actually implementing that route. Alternatively, you see law as a career but have other interests at the minute, like you are interested in geography, you want to do linguistics, you could still do that alternate degree and do a GDL, which is the conversion course. The issue is you do the GDL and then you have to do the LPC or the bar course.
Okay.
So you have 1 extra year of study that as a non-law student allows you to convert into technically a law student, basically. And then you do either of the qualification paths.
Okay.
Third option, which I think is just not spoken about as often, is you can choose universities not for you. You want to dive straight into the world of work. And a lot of big firms now offer solicitor apprenticeship schemes, which is literally for people who are fresh out of high school and they come in as apprentices. And the really interesting thing about all of these programs, if you're doing it at a big firm, is they're very structured. There's a lot of learning and development that is incorporated into this. There are classes, there are exams you have to pass. So the difference is they start at the age of 18 and work and study in tandem as they go along. And their structure is a bit different in terms of like they have to do kind of 4 years in a specific department in a firm, and then they enter a training contract and so on and so forth. So they have a bit of a different structure that they follow. But the way I see it, these are kind of the 3 routes if you are in school and you're thinking about law.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you want to become a barrister. You have to then, once you've done the BPTC, you do a pupillage. You've probably already done a mini pupillage, which is basically the equivalent
Of a spring scheme or a vacation scheme. Yeah.
And the pupillage is the equivalent of a training
contract, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, and you're a member of one of the 4 Inns of Court?
Yeah.
Right, okay. If you become a solicitor, it's either a regional firm, a high street firm,
International
or
firm,
an international firm, something bigger, maybe what some people would call Silver Circle or Magic Circle.
Yeah.
I think the focus of this episode is going to be on those higher tier firms,
Yeah.
international corporate law firms, so
Yeah.
to speak. Is it fair to say that you're somewhat of a business consultant? You're giving advice, you're advising businesses, in which case, why not just go into consulting? Or, is the emphasis on law if you go into corporate law?
The emphasis is definitely on law because in our day-to-day, we are drafting contracts, reviewing contracts, negotiating points of these kind of legal frameworks that set up these deals. So you can't take away kind of the legal foundation of it all. So it's not, I think the difference would be that there is a specialist element involved here, that consulting is a bit more generalist and sector focused, whereas ours is broken down into different practice areas of the law. And it's always coming from a legal perspective. And I think lawyers just have a different way of thinking. We are more risk averse. We are always looking out in terms of kind of compliance and making sure we're within the realms of the law and things like that. So I think it's a bit more specialist than that, and that makes all the difference. And between choosing corporate law and consulting, I've spent 3 years learning a very niche degree and understanding the law, and I want to see how it's applied and see how it actually works in practice, which it's quite different to university.
Yeah, and you wanted to also speak about the different areas or the different firms that you can apply to, right?
Yeah.
Do you mind breaking that down for us?
Yeah, of course. So I think London is a hub for everything in the world, and law is also equally one of those. And obviously the focus here is corporate law in the city, but you can also be a human rights lawyer, you can be a criminal lawyer, family lawyer. There are plenty of opportunities out there, and firms are broken in terms of size and scale. They can be broken down. So we have high street firms, which are literally firms that you will see if you're walking on any of the high streets. You'll see it's named after someone like Stewart and Brothers LLP, and that is a high street law firm. And actually a lot of them usually will be doing landlord rent and kind of property conveyancing. The high street firms, everyone is signing a contract when they rent a flat. Those high street firms do it predominantly. Then you have regional firms that are British firms, that are British household names that work for a lot of the big British companies, and they actually have offices across the UK. So you could do a training contract at their Nottingham office, and they have a more regional focus. And then the ones kind of I applied to and focused on were the international corporate ones who have multiple offices around the world, and their focus is mainly finance of some kind. But at the same time, it can also, we also in my firm have an employment team. We have a real estate team, and so we do real estate finance and things like that. So it can all kind of be broken down and very, very kind of flexible in terms of which areas you're looking into.
Divya, could you explain to me what those circles mean? Magic circle, red circle, all of that.
Yeah, sure. we were discussing this earlier, where I don't know if the whole circle classification really still stands, but think of it in this way of, you have the big four, the accounting firms, and that's a classification. And then you have, of course, the American consulting firms like Accenture and whatever. So similarly, in the legal sector, we have kind of a magic circle, and we have like 4 or 5 firms who are considered a part of the magic circle. Below that is a silver circle tier, and then kind of the rest filter, through beyond that. My understanding is that these classifications originated from kind of trying to rank the firms and trying to establish who is the best. And I think criteria they used were revenue, global footprint, and what their reach is internationally, what their focus was. Some of them focus heavily on private equity and so on and so forth. And now we have a whole new market in the UK, which is the American firms, who are usually Wall Street or New York based, and they're like here in London have set up solid kind of offices and offer training contracts of their own. A newer addition, the latest one, is the big four are doing training contracts. You could pursue a legal career at any of the consulting firms as well, and they do structured, the same training contract I do, you could pursue at Deloitte.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, fun fact. So
are there any downsides to that?
Not really. If anything, I think city firms are viewing that as a they're viewing that as a form of competition, because it's a one-stop shop, right? You can go somewhere to get your auditing work done, your consulting work done, and your legal work done. It's kind of an accumulated bill and streamline of the work is also streamlined, and it's all coming from one place. Downside, information barriers, information exchange, trying to keep that all separate, because sometimes people who are doing your legal work can't necessarily speak or liaise with people who are maintaining your books. So sometimes I think there are definite benefits of keeping those aspects separate, but it's up and coming, and it's what clients want and what the client needs are.
Related to that, like there's also these legal jobs in every company, right? Like, I mean, not just the big four, but all at the banks, everywhere. There's
absolutely going in-house is what we call it. And I think a common career path is to train at one of these big firms, do the solid training contract, and then a lot of people qualify and stay a few years and then go in-house, because either they're looking for a better work-life balance, or they just want a better pay sometimes, depending if it's like a big investment bank you're going in-house into. So yeah, there's that option. And you could be a paralegal, you could be a legal analyst for like a legal tech company. So there are lots of different pathways and opportunities that are in the city, like if you're really looking for it. And
you can also get a training contract in-house.
Yeah, you can do.
You? Say Coca-Cola or a big business.
Exactly. A lot of the big corporates do their own structured, like any graduate scheme. It's a legal focused graduate scheme. And
like at King's, when you were in like the law society as a careers officer and stuff, did you see a trend that most people actually just wanted to work in the magic circle, and that was the dream, and then everyone else kind of trickled down into other legal jobs?
I mean, you're spot on. I mean, you weren't there, but that was literally what happened. I think we were very intensely corporate law focused as well, and we had connections with all the city firms, and they'd come in for networking events, and that was my main exposure. It was in my university building, that'd be like a networking event, and I just drop by, speak to a few people, get to know what's happening from their experiences. That was actually my first exposure to this world and to wanting to pursue it. So I always say, you come in with such an open mind, or like your own aspirations as a law student of like, I want to be the next Amal Clooney. And then you come and suddenly it's like, okay, choose solicitor or barrister. Okay, choose again, corporate or like non-corporate. And then you just start making these choices, and somehow you sometimes end up in a box. So what I really tried to do was go to all kinds of events. I did mooting, but I also did negotiation. I went to the Bar Society and the General Law Society. Like, I just wanted to make sure I tried everything to try and make the most informed decision, because otherwise it's all glossy and pretty, it's well paid, it's sponsored, and it's great, but you also want to make sure you're like kind of making the right choice. But you are right. I think being in London as a city, you're drawn to the big names and you want to kind of pursue those. It's like the whole banking finance world as well. Yeah.
You mentioned pay, so could you give us maybe a range of what students can hope for when they enter law, and difference between different law types?
It can be as wide as you want. You don't have to answer it. Like,
no, I mean, it just depends the market, right? So if you're outside of London, it's lesser than it would be in London, just because of living costs and the types of firms. Regional firms, I'd say from 30 onwards. international law firms, maybe from like 45 onwards as a trainee, the thing that everybody usually hates us for is that there's a big jump after you finish your training contract. So you technically do a 2-year training contract. So I'm going to talk about I think we might as well focus it. Otherwise, we're going to be kind of in all different sectors. So if you're pursuing corporate law as a solicitor and you're doing a 2-year training contract in the city, I think you can expect from like a 45, 55, 60 range. And the minute you qualify, that is your 2-year training period is done, you're qualifying as an associate, and you kind of choose to qualify into a department that you have had an experience in during the training contract. So during the training contract, you rotate between different departments. Mm-hmm. And then when you qualify as an associate, this doubles. And that now is open to interpretation. And as an associate, your pay can range from like 90 to I think the city now is going up to 180, 200.
Okay.
Is it true that the American firms tend to pay better?
Yeah. And that is the biggest allure for a lot of people. The big attraction is pay if you're moving to an American firm. And that is a certain trade-off you make for it. And anybody who does their research will be able to spot that difference.
Great. You spoke about some of the different practice areas.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but training contracts are rotational.
Yeah,
right? So
exactly.
You rotate through different departments, like you're saying. How many departments and which different areas you get to pick, right?
Yeah, we do. So it differs from firm to firm. Different firms have different systems. The baseline structure to become a qualified solicitor is you sit in kind of 4 departments, 6 months each over 2 years. And each firm will have their own criteria of like, if it's a finance heavy firm, you have to have sat in one of their finance departments, sat in a transactional seat, sat in kind of a disputes litigation oriented seat, just to make sure you're getting like a breadth of everything, to make sure you're an all-rounded trainee or lawyer. So they will have their own criterias. What was most exciting for me with this path was during these 2 years, my firm, for example, offers an opportunity to go abroad. I can do 6 months in any one of our international offices. Not anyone, but like they offer, like every year there's kind of openings in certain offices. You can go do finance in Singapore, do kind of project finance in Paris, like wherever. So you can do 6 months abroad, or you can do 6 months with a client. So we call those foreign secondments or client secondments. And the idea is, in addition to your basic training and getting all the skills that you need, you get that opportunity to engage internationally, because it's a global firm. They want to make sure you engage with international law, another office and the people there and the culture there. And then on the client side, it's getting the client experience. It's an insight into in-house life. You go and you kind of have like that 9 to 5 working in a bank or whichever client you end up going to. We have some cool secondments actually. You can go to Meta, you can go to Facebook. All the banks, usually we Goldman Sachs, and it's a big one, Barclays. So it's interesting for people to, in this phase, like experience all these different types of work, essentially. Yeah.
Could you tell us, in your training, how does your day look like? What do you do?
Sure. So I am currently in my finance seat, which is actually one of my compulsory seats to qualify at my firm. So a day in the life of I typically start around 9. We have like a team meeting to discuss capacity, because it's busy and it's intense, and my firm kind of places a good emphasis on managing people's capacity, making sure no one's doing too much and no one is kind of doing too little. So we help each other out and try to balance that. So my team starts with a meeting to like discuss capacity, what each of us are working on. Then I'd maybe have a client call or 2 to discuss a deal. So currently it's the nature of the department that you're in. So because I'm in a finance department, we'll have like, let's say I'm on 7 or 8 active deals in that week, and things will be happening in all of them. So it's kind of like, it's really interesting, like practice management, multitasking, exercising like all different sides of your brain at once in one day is what I find like really interesting, moving in between and kind of switching in between the different deals. So we'll have a client call to discuss like our progress, what we're preparing for a meeting, let's say with the lawyers from the other side. Then I'd spend like 2 hours maybe doing a due diligence task, which is like reviewing contracts and making a report of like the status of a deal. Usually I like to take a lunch break just to give my brain a break, even if that's like 20 minutes. If I'm generous, maybe an hour. And then sometimes, so as part of becoming a solicitor in the UK, the SRA requires you to do a few courses. So there's learning we do alongside the way as well. So sometimes, I'll have like negotiation course scheduled. So I do it with my cohort of trainees. We go and sit and learn for an hour or two. And then I come back and I could be doing some drafting, like drafting kind of an engagement letter, drafting a contract, whatever it may be, doing some legal drafting. And then evenings, we could have another client call. So it's it's very client facing. There's a lot of emailing, managing emails and inboxes, responding to questions from be it lawyers, be it clients, whoever. That happens throughout. That's a general theme of my day, replying to the emails. And yeah, drafting, reviewing, those are the kind of skills we use, and tasks we do throughout the day.
How good would you say your work-life balance is?
What are the hours like?
Okay, I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think similarly to the world of finance, corporate law has kind of the intense hours as well. Again, I know this doesn't help anyone's case, but it does depend on the firm you are. It depends on which seat you are at the time. Some practice areas tend to be quieter and a bit more manageable than others. And I'd say my average day is like 9 a.m. to 7:30, 8 p.m. And when a deal is closing and you have to kind of be available for like signings and stuff, those are like really kind of a bit more longer days. But I think overall it's not too bad. I think there's so much, I think the legal industry has made a lot of progress of trying to put an emphasis on well-being and kind of setting those boundaries. But it's still like the way finance is, right? So you go there and you do what you need to do. And there can be long days, some are shorter, and you kind of learn to manage that.
I again want to like take a step back, and as like someone watching the podcast who wants to break in to the industry, the pathway. So in finance, it's usually in the first year of your university, you apply for this spring week mini internship thing, where you do like a couple of days at the firm, and then hopefully if they like you, they give you a return offer to join the following summer. And then if they like you there, they give you a return offer to join full time.
Yeah.
And like in between the process, you might be able to, find another way in. So you might get the summer in the second year without the first year. You might actually get the full-time job, which is increasingly very rare to get the job without the internship. So there's this sort of pipeline process in lots of industries, and consulting as well. In consulting, I know it's a lot easier to get the final graduate job without the internship. So there's these idiosyncratic differences between industries. In law, now let's assume that the student has chosen law as the degree. Now you're in first year of university.
Fine. So increasingly, we are seeing a lot of firms offer first year schemes. So that's become a thing now. Because usually it used to be similar to a spring scheme. We have a thing called a vacation scheme. That second years usually do, because it's a 3-year degree, right? But now that are on offer, a lot of firms have first year schemes. So you can apply as a first year. They're much shorter schemes, maybe like a week long perhaps. And it is a full immersive internship kind of experience. But at that point, you're still like a fresher. So like with all experiences, I think there's only so far you can go. But I mean, in the market, we do have firms who are offering training contracts off the back of first year schemes. So it just depends on how intent you are, how much you apply yourself, and kind of know at that age and stage that this is what you want to do, and you're willing to sign a dotted line that says that. Kind of scary. But so there are first year schemes.
So that's 2 years from now that you'll join the firm.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so commitment. So there are first year schemes. Alternatively, there are these things called open days, which you can do, where law firms open themselves up, and they usually put out on their websites when these open days are. You can look into when certain law firms have their open days, and there's a specific application process for that. It's less rigorous than applying for a scheme. It's because it's just a taster day kind of induction sort of experience. But you still have to apply for those, and you can get an open day and go spend a day at the firm and have like a full experience trying to understand the firm a bit better as well. So then comes second year, where people apply for vacation schemes. And so we have a bunch on offer. There are 3 cycles. You can do a winter scheme, you can do a spring scheme, or you can do a summer scheme. And different firms offer all 3. Some do just summer, some do just winter and summer. So this is all based on your market research and which firms you're planning to pursue.
How does the winter one work? You're in university at the time, right?
Christmas holidays. So they do it over like the 2-3 weeks of Christmas, unfortunately.
They tend to be 2 weeks, don't they?
2 weeks. Well, yeah, depends on the firm again. So the one I did was 3 weeks. I know certain firms that could do 4.
So it's a lot shorter than your traditional summer.
Yeah, and also because some like the best candidates often tend to do multiple in one summer as well. You can. And people sometimes have to make choices between firms if the dates clash, because those are the ones who are spoiled for choice. Different type of person. But my journey was a bit different in that I so I got to law school. I was exploring all of these different opportunities. Everyone was applying to first year schemes, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but let's give it a go. Very uninformed, did one application. Obviously didn't get it because I just didn't know what I was doing. And then I was looking for a part-time job, and I was on these legal boards. You can look at like the Bright Network or Legal Cheek or whatever, and I saw an offering to be like a campus ambassador for a law firm. And this was a firm that I'd come into contact with. So for law, they put up law fairs, and like uni does a lot in terms of like trying to get you connected. I think having gone to a London university, even if I wanted to go to an open day, the firms are like a tube ride away. So I think that kind of face time and contact that I got was really invaluable. I could actually go to these offices and see these people in their kind of natural habitat. So I'd met this firm at kind of a law fair at university, and I was like, this name sounds familiar. Did some research, applied, and became their campus ambassador.
Right.
What that then allowed me to do was I was the ambassador for the whole of second year. And like now I'm on campus paid to promote this firm. And the way this firm ran it was that I got to engage and interact with the lawyers there. Okay. So that like the partner like their team is all King's alumni who work at the firm now.
Okay.
So they were lovely, and like they really welcomed me, and we worked together to organize graduate events for law students at King's.
This was before you had worked there or had gotten
this
the
is just
offer.
in second year. So I was just their campus ambassador for second year, and I was, luckily for me, like the graduate recruitment partner was the King's partner. It worked. So I really enjoyed it, and I thought they were just really collaborative, encouraging people to be around. And I was like, I'm genuinely quite keen on the culture of this firm. So then I did their vacation scheme application, got that, did the 3-week vacation scheme, and at the end...
Rewind. How many applications did you end up applying for when you were in... So I think I've mentioned this in previous podcasts, but I ended up applying for... In somewhere in undergrad, I ended up applying for 120-ish.
This is superhuman. I
did not.
It's just, well, there's two arguments, right? There's the...
quality over quantity.
Yeah. But it's like it's a numbers game thing that's thrown around everywhere. And some people subscribe to it, and some people really, really are against it. They're like, no, do 6 applications, 10 applications, and really, really focus on them. But then what happens when those 6 reject you, So what was your experience? You obviously had like an insight into the firm. You knew this was one that you wanted to apply for. But did you have to apply for like all the firms in the city? Is that fair to say?
I adopted kind of a process of elimination because at the time, for me, it was my personal circumstance as well. I was like, first year was really me trying to find my footing. And honestly, grades wise wasn't kind of the best year for me. So I was like, okay, I need to figure out how to think like a lawyer, and I need to figure out how to get into this legal mindset. Was a major focus of mine. So then, and this is, I think, a decision every law student applicant has to make about prioritizing uni life with application life, because I think they're both at the cost of one another sometimes based on how hard and intensively you decide to approach it. And so for me, at the time, it was like, I need to get a good grade on this degree to get the job as well. So I need to kind of prioritize my academics, but I also want to explore the career path. So I decided I would kind of be limited in my approach, which arguably may not have been the best thing to do. It's very like all my eggs in one basket situation, which depending if you play poker, I don't know if this is the best strategy. I decided I'd go all in on the firm I was already working for. It just made the most sense to me. I had the most insight with them.
You had that direct contact.
Exactly,
as well,
right. But this then begs the question of how much value does networking have, right? Which we'll get to. But then there were 2 other firms that I had done debate competitions with. So I'd been to their firms, engaged with their like lawyers. And for me, I decided based on the people I met, to be really brutally honest. Because when you're looking at the legal market at a certain tier, like you said, if you're looking at Magic Silver American firms, at face value, they all seem the same. They're all doing international work. Their pay is around the same band. If you're American, maybe higher. The clients look very similar. Their areas of finance and kind of the corporate law that they work on is quite similar. So at face value, when everybody looks similar, for me, the only distinguishment was the culture. It was, who am I speaking to that is making me feel like I could be a part of that? Which is a very subjective lens to look at things through. And I filtered 3 firms out of that and only did 3 applications. Risky.
Wow. Very risky.
It was. And I didn't get the other 2. And I only got this. So going into that vacation scheme for me was like, I'm all in. Like, I have to see this through now. The next 3 weeks are going to be very intense in that I just want to make sure I've given, like, just do your best and forget the rest. That was the mentality throughout for those 3 weeks. It's interesting, a lot of firms, people have different approaches, Manu. I know so many of my friends who did the same thing that you did, that they went all for quantity. For me, it was just, I wanted to make sure all the applications were tailored enough, because otherwise what could set me apart, So it was like the time spent doing that market research, understanding the firm, doing the networking, and incorporating those personal points in that cover letter was what I was placing a lot more emphasis on, and that was my strategy. But different people will do it differently, because now there are so many resources that exist that give you an insight into firms more than ever before. So you could actually if you use those well enough, you could easily produce 20 personal applications these days. I think it's a bit different.
Chamber student being one, right?
Good one. Chamber student is very good to it literally has the list of all the chambers and all the firms in the city. And for someone who didn't know anything, it's a great place to start to filter, firms down and start picking and choosing which ones. So I did these 3 applications, got one of them, and then did the vacation.
How do you prepare for those applications? How do you go for the interviews? How do you learn? How do you...
Similar, I think similar to all of these processes we've all been through. There are many stages, and different firms do them a bit differently. Mm-hmm. So there's the cover letter application phase, psychometric tests. In law, they do a test called the Watson-Glaser.
Okay.
So I would, if anyone who's interested, I'd say do invest in practicing the Watson-Glaser and doing practice tests, and because it's an odd one. Right? It's a free one. Yeah, you can do lots of trials. If you've applied for a law degree, you do something called the LNAT before you go to law school, and it's similar. These are 2 tests you can't really prepare for. Okay. It's those kind of psychometric tests. So we have the Watson-Glaser, or now firms are doing game theory, and they're actually mixing it up. Okay. Right?
Tough.
Familiar territory. Familiar. So there's the whole test, kind of online testing. My firm didn't have the video telephone interview, but the other 2 firms I applied to did. I had telephone interviews for both of them. And then you go into an HR interview, you'll sometimes have a partner interview, and then you get kind of the scheme. Now, setting that aside, you can also go straight for a training contract. You don't have to do any scheme before. And there's a decent number of people that get direct TCs, is what we call it. They directly apply for a training contract and get that. So these can be people who finish law school, are being a paralegal, they decide to go direct. I want a job now, so I'm going to go straight for the training contract. There are lots of people who do that. People who are paralegaling at law firms apply to the same firm. We have, non-law students who do direct TCs as well. And so you can go all in directly to the last stage. You don't have to kind of go this way either.
Okay. Yeah, Divya, I just want to ask a little bit more specifically about preparing for those interviews. What kind of questions they usually ask? What are the things that might, trip people up when they enter for interviews? In every industry, there's different stuff. There's brain teasers, which when I was applying, I hated doing brain teasers. But you get better at them over time.
Yeah. I think accepting that with respect to those questions it's about how you get to the answer as opposed to the answer itself. Top tip. But okay, how I did it was starting from the cover letter stage. I think this is why your firm research skills come into play. And I did kind of online research. I was on student forums where previous applicants, divulge secrets, and speaking to associates, trainees, partners across every level at those 3 firms. Then what I did was, law firms generally tend to do this thing where they put out the 5 key competencies that they're looking for in an applicant. So I extracted the competencies for the specific firms I was applying to, and I kind of did a mind map of what are the skills, experiences that I have that will showcase these competencies. And I think that is kind of key when you're doing an application like a cover letter. I think also understanding what is the firm placing an emphasis on. Is it a firm that places an emphasis on culture? Is it a firm that places emphasis on competence or your commercial awareness? And knowing that will then allow you to tailor the cover letter accordingly. It's like writing a unipersonal statement kind of, So that's where the process started for me, filtering into okay, what do the firms want and how can I align myself to those wants and needs? Then the second layer is also trying to maintain your individuality throughout. And this is something I really believe in. And I think your USP is definitely something any applicant, I think in any profession, should highlight, but also in the legal sector, I think it's quite relevant of what do you bring to the table to this global organization, wherever you're applying. Then you get to, be it an HR interview or a partner interview, there are certain types of questions that they generally always tend to ask. So first is commercial awareness questions. Commercial awareness is such a buzzword within the law kind of applicant scene. And what it essentially means is understanding what's going on commercially in the market, like the market that these firms function in. And so, for example, you read something in the news, right? And you're like, okay, so this huge merger and acquisition has happened, like Morrison's is being bought out or whatever. And more than just knowing that that's happened, you then need to think about the knock-on effects for like the legal industry and like think about, okay, if this has happened, what are the other competitors thinking about? Does the firm I'm applying to represent one of their competitors? And, you know, like what is just thinking, being able to think about all these moving parts and thinking about it commercially. Commercial awareness is a major thing. So they will often ask you questions, put you in kind of commercial situations that corporate lawyers will face and ask you to kind of, how would you solve it? How would you approach it based on the market knowledge you have? A commercial awareness question could be as basic as, tell me 3 things you read in the FT this morning.
I was going to ask, is it a case of just reading the FT, BBC Business?
It could, it may as well be. I think those are great starting places. I think just listening to that podcast, making sure you know what's going on in the news is what I found to be kind of the stepping stone. For me, commercial awareness was my weakness. So it was something I actively focused on because I just didn't know anything to do. I had not even done kind of econ in school. So I didn't know finance. So I went online and did courses like, what is private equity? What is a merger and acquisition? I didn't know what M&A was. So I had to like do that kind of market specific knowledge building. I think it goes a far way. I think making that effort to understand and, you know, in case someone asks you and you're not caught off guard or can at least attempt something goes a far way. So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of like trying to build my commercial awareness specifically. So there's commercial awareness questions is the first level. Then there's these competency-based questions where they'd be like, tell us about a time when you, that's how those start, you know, tell us about a time when you experienced a failure or like what's your biggest strength. Those, you know, we know those standard ones. Then we have situational judgment questions, which are kind of legal specific. And what I have found is that these tend to test your approach to law specific legal situations. So for example, we are all, as solicitors in the UK, we are governed by kind of the SRA, and they have like a code of conduct and there are certain principles you have to follow as a solicitor in the UK. And I realized in retrospect, because this SRA and learning all of this comes later, like after you've got the job, so you only realize in retrospect what they're actually testing at that point. And I found it was actually like it's like compliance questions. It's like situational questions. They'll build on it, right? It'll start with, you're working at a law firm, you're working on a deal, you accidentally send a confidential email to the other side. What would you do? And then they build on it. It's like, you know, you have a house, the house is on fire. The house is on fire and it's flying. And like, they just build and build. Because you'd respond and you'd be like, I would go to my supervisor, I'd go to the partner. And like, then they'd be like, oh no, the partner's not there. So they'd build and because they want to put pressure on you. They want to simulate an environment that would be akin to a workplace. Their workplace, essentially, it's high pressure and there's lots of things at stake. So situational judgment is something I think someone should kind of ideally prepare for. And then my firm does this whole like one rogue question, and you just have to be ready for it. It can be, how many hairs are there on a dog? How many tennis balls can you use to fill a plane? You know, are fun ones. And I think with all of these questions, situational, commercial, random brain teaser, it's what I said before, it's about how you get to your answer. They want to know how you think, and they want to know how you express yourself and how well you are articulating what you think. And if you're a law student, something I experienced that they try to do is they try to be like, one thing I got asked in my interview was explain consideration as if I was your grandmother. And consideration is like one of the more complex contract law. I say complex, but it's harder than when I say offer and acceptance. Sorry, they're pretty self-explanatory. You offer something, you accept something. But consideration, all of you are looking at me like, we don't know what that means.
I will consider it. Is that what it is? Not really.
No, now we're testing my contract law, and I'm going to get into that. But it's they want to make sure you're good at communication. You can communicate complex legal concepts to any layman in the most simplistic manner possible. So it's about all those different skills that they're going to try to test and tease out of you. And I think it's just maintaining your composure, being calm and collected, but giving every question a fair shot is, I think, how you succeed in these interviews. And fully believing the fact that there is no right answer. They're not looking for a specific answer, because if there's 20 people who can all give the same answer to one question, then what's the point in that? There is no kind of diversity of thought or approach in that. So I think everyone should be confident in their approach. Don't try to like, in the process of preparation, don't read up the model answers or what you think might be the best answer, because if you don't see yourself actually giving that answer, it's not coming from you. And they're really looking for how would you approach this? How would you answer this? So you should always be mindful of that, I think, during the process.
Super interesting.
You mentioned being commercially aware.
Yeah.
And understanding what's going on in the markets in which the law firm operates. In a word, why? Or rather, to take a step back, what do law firms actually do?
Right. Because we're so client-driven, you have to understand what's going on in the client's world. And you have to kind of be aware of what's relevant to them, what's important to them. You know, some of the best lawyers I know in the industry, or like even within my team, like I'd walk into work and then my, partner or supervisor will be like, oh, do you know, like this company got bought by that company. Like all I've done that morning is like buy a coffee. But like, they have read up, or, an alert has come through, because that's directly relevant to a deal we're working on. Like we are doing a merger and acquisition and one part of the company has like gone bust, or like a bank we work for is under review or something. They've had some kind of like situation happen, and it's important for us to know all of this, because the market is so intertwined and connected. And it's like, when you follow, like if you're a trader and you follow like, all the different peaks and troughs of the stock market and things like that. So it directly impacts your client, and they want you to think commercially when providing them with solutions, because you can't just say, I'm here to give legal advice. This is what the law says. This is what the law says. Here are 3 options we can give you. This is the most profitable. This is profitable but also like safe, and this is, like that's how we present solutions. We don't just say like, you are a bank, this is like, I'm making this up, but like, this is the Banking Act and this is what it says. No, it's always like, how can we better your position and further your needs? And that's why that understanding of the market is necessary. We can't just come in and say this is what the law says.
Just coming back to the application and the first part of CVs and cover letters, is there some standard things that people need to know when applying, like some format or anything?
There is. I don't think firms are very like picky on this, but there's a separate kind of legal CV format, and you just have to look it up. It's quite accessible on the internet. It just looks a bit different in structure, but pretty much the same.
In terms of timeline, when do application normally open, and
right,
when it's better to apply?
So direct TCs have a separate timeline. You can apply like from September to December or Jan for direct TCs. This also overlaps with like the winter vacation scheme application season. And then again, it opens up for spring. And then there's also like a summer round of interviews as well. So honestly speaking, if you kind of multitasked well, there's always an application season open to you based on the firm, because some firms have so many open. So it's not as restrictive and seasonal, because they do it kind of throughout the year. So I think if you do your research and set out a timeline, I think that's really helpful if you're going for a lot of firms. Set out timelines, do up your spreadsheet, plan your academic year in line with your application year, and kind of, do that. Like I think that's a great thing to do, like just stay organized with that.
Okay, so you get the vacation scheme. You have 3 weeks to impress. 3 weeks to land a job for them, for you to prove to them that they should hire you full time. 3 weeks is so short. In most industries, it's a lot longer. 10 weeks, quite normal. How do you impress in 3 weeks and convince people to give you a job?
Good question.
And link to that networking. How important is it?
Yeah. I think networking is very important. From like if you have made up your mind that this is a career you want to pursue, every opportunity is a networking opportunity. You could be at a simple event at uni. They're having like a drinks. Who are you speaking to? Like kind of, keep that in mind. I think the contacts you build are very useful. People's lived experiences are invaluable, I think. The insight that they can share with you, the tips and tricks that they've learned along the way, I've personally found that to be the most, like the driving force in my journey. So I'd say like network throughout. And at the end of the day, it's not about coming across the most competent or like, I know what's happening and like, saying something. I've been in situations where I've heard people say things, they don't really know what they mean. And it comes off really badly, you want to make sure that you're there actually representing yourself and not saying things that you think people want to hear. So I'd say really, and it applies across all levels. You know, someone once told me that when you walk in for an interview or an assessment center, from the receptionist onwards, everybody's watching you. Like, you can't, you know, you could rock up there super stressed and be like super rude to the first person you speak to, who is the doorman or the receptionist. But that is an impression. It's the first impression. So I think you have to be mindful of who you're speaking to and how you're presenting yourself. And I think personal brand has a huge role to play whenever you step in the door of a prospective employer. And maintaining that personal brand then for however long, 3 or 10 weeks, is very important, because you find that people come in with a certain attitude, and then like week 2, everyone is too busy, it falls away. Like if you're there with like a facade, you can't hold it much longer because you're being stimulated in every way. Like you need to like do 10 things, so you might as well just be yourself. I would say if you are doing a vacation scheme, do your prep. Kind of make sure you've been reading the news and you're on top of things before you enter, and you're kind of in that zone and mindset. Do the work you are given well. I think every task, like, you know, because people struggle between wanting to set up coffees and networking with partners, but then also there's this research task they've been given by whoever their supervisor is on the scheme. I would say balance the two. Like, make sure you're doing your tasks, all the best practices, you know, communicating how long it's going to take, speaking to people about deadlines. They want to see that you can exhibit all these good skills that are required in a trainee. Like, what makes a good trainee? You know, ask people that and show a genuine interest and do your tasks well, but also be strategic. Speak to the people you want to speak. Get your foot in the door with whichever departments you're interested in. You know, if you have a specific interest in like real estate, make sure you've spoken to someone there, because these are all people that they will reach out to internally and gather information about you. They'll ask people what they thought of you. So making that impression on people is important. Showing them you can produce a high quality of work is important. There are a lot of socials that are also a part of this experience, and I know it gets tiring. I don't know how you guys do 10 weeks, honestly. Those 3 weeks were so intense for me. You have to make sure like that you're participating, and you are, you know, if it's a firm that embodies, like, if teamwork is such a big thing and they give you things like a presentation, like we had a presentation to do during our time there, and I think how that presentation went determined a lot of people's outcomes on my scheme. You know, things like that. So I think you have to be on top of you have to just be at your 100% throughout. I don't know if that's helpful or was too generic.
Well, like in terms of success rates, so we all know applications, it's a very low success rate to like land a job.
Yeah.
But you're in the internship, and now you're kind of like, you're talking to partners, you're working on the projects, you do the presentation, it comes out well. But there are still some things that are sort of out of your control. Like, is it 50% of people land the final job? Is it less? Is it...
Okay.
Yeah, what's the success rate?
Different firms have different stats. My particular year, we did really well as a cohort. I think out of there were 24 of us, I think, and I think around 15 of us got offered.
Okay.
And I'm working with a lot of them. Like, we all chose this firm, and whoever didn't choose the firm is now there are other firms in the city. They had other offers and things like that. So we had a good success rate that year. But then you'd see, you know, the winter scheme after didn't do as well. Like, it's very like seasonal. It is very volatile. But I think it just depends on the strength of the cohort and what they're looking for at the time. I think it's worthwhile thinking of it as like, you know, people sometimes get into these schemes and they're like, the people in this room are my competition. No. I really believe that's the wrong mentality to go into it with, because in addition to your scheme, there are 3 other schemes they've run that year. There are direct applicants coming in through the door. And I do believe that if you are going to get a training contract, you will get it. You may not get it for the next kind of opening. Like, so for example, let's say I'm doing it this summer. Okay, I'd get offered a TC, because let's count the year that you have to do the LPC, right? So let's say I get offered like March 2024. If March 2024 is full, they'll give you September 2024. So I think it's a very kind of, you're closing yourself up if you think that this is your direct competition. I think it should just be putting your best foot forward regardless. Because if you're good and they want to offer you the job, they'll make space for you whenever. Even if that is, you take 6 months off before you start work or whatever, right? It's not like this batch is only eligible for this opening. It's nothing, I don't think firms, as far as I'm aware, work like that. Because I've had friends who have TCs coming up in like 2 years. And in the meantime, I've gone traveling and we'll do the LPC in between and have like this bit of a buffer period in between. So, yeah.
Okay. And then Divya, coming back to your story, so you had that period where you were waiting, you were doing your thing, and I know that you did an internship at a AI legal firm. Now, this is particularly interesting to me. Is technology going to replace law?
Oh, I don't think so. I think the human element is so important. That client contact is so important in kind of the work that we do, and you can't have a robot sit at a client meeting. You know what I mean? Like, okay,
the client,
just building the robot.
The client has a certain set of specifications, like set parameters they want. It's a contract for property. It's in certain area,
right?
And you just want like a template.
Yeah,
that can be creative,
of course,
right?
And I mean, if anything, so the reason I pursued that kind of legal tech internship is tech is becoming such a big part of law firms. Every big firm is or should be investing in kind of that tech arm, and they all have like contract reading softwares and production template softwares, and this is just about making things more efficient basically, and saving costs more than anything. So yeah, there are softwares that exist. The one I was actually working for, it can read certain types of contracts, so like sales and goods contracts, like the basic ones, and it'll like traffic light based on like how volatile your position is. It's like a traffic light system.
So used by top firms?
I think so. They're still a startup, so they're still rolling it out. But there are a few in the market, like Kira is being used by like Clifford Chance and like some big firms in the city. So there are already firms that use these softwares, and it definitely exists these products. But in terms of negotiating, meeting clients' needs, I think you need that human element.
In terms of the general question, which could be asked in an interview actually, like how is technology disrupting law? I mean, if you look at something like medicine, there are certainly some parts of medicine which, like reading scans and stuff, which you can get a computer to do with maybe higher degrees of accuracy.
Yeah.
And some parts of being a doctor, like some more human.
The empathy and kind of treating the patient of like, okay, if someone is crying, they've heard bad news from the doctor, you need a person there, right?
You can't have an automated message.
Yeah, no manager. I know you wouldn't mind one, but no, you usually can't.
Usually can't have an automated message. So I guess like how future-proof is the industry? Like for someone who's just thinking about like law as a career, will it exist 50 years from now?
I don't know. I like to believe it will. But to directly answer your question, I think tech literacy is a key skill that's going to come up as like, this is a core competency we're looking for in a candidate. Being able to use these softwares, understand these softwares. I was doing very basic kind of like a coding course because I thought it would be useful, because if we end up using very complex softwares to do our legal processing, maybe having the coding kind of language would be an additional skill in my belt, so I think definitely candidates should look into how they can become more tech literate, how they can be a part of this tech wave that is going on in law. I still don't believe it's going to replace lawyers. I think that is necessary. There is a major human element that is involved with the law in general, but it doesn't hurt to further your skill set, to make sure you're moving along with the times. And it's the biggest struggle for like partners who are now like really trying to adapt with all the new technologies that are coming in, and I think they're frankly doing a great job, at least at my firm as far as I've seen. But it's a big change and it's happening faster than we can so we're all trying to get ahead, because otherwise we're going to be playing catch up very soon.
And do you think law as a skill set has been valuable for you as well? I guess like everyone has to deal with the law like every single time. So now when we're renting a property, you have a contract, and I've actually seen like some landlords have things like, I mean, to my understanding, the landlord should take care of maintenance and stuff, but they put things into the contract like, oh, it's your responsibility. And like it's so strange to me, because like if you don't actually read the contract, which lots of people don't in most things, you wouldn't know. So do you think like just having an understanding of law for anybody, even non-lawyers, is like such a valuable and useful thing?
I think so. And you forget sometimes, it's like the terms and conditions that you click agree to on your phone. How many times a day do you do that, right? You're signing on to some public Wi-Fi network and you have to click agree to the T&Cs. You're on an app, you're on any social media app, you have to agree to their terms and conditions to be a part of it. And that's all kind of legal and relevant. From like your personal information, like GDPR is a whole new thing in the UK, and understanding the GDPR framework is something lawyers do. Very relevant to daily life, to answer your question. And that's what we're here for, which is why I think we can't be replaced.
If you were to be replaced.
Yeah.
No.
Wow. Okay.
General question.
Yeah.
Beyond law. I'm not saying you do, but do people treat it as a stepping stone?
Yeah.
And if they do switch career or don't make a partner, where do people tend to go afterwards?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mentioned this earlier when we were speaking before we started recording, that I don't... Traditionally, the partner track is something, that people, especially if you pursue the solicitor pathway, you join, you train, you qualify, you work, get promoted, you start climbing a ladder, as you do in most of these companies, professions, and corporate organizations. And partner track is like this buzzword that people use. And there are people who still want that, and that's the goal, and they love the law, and that's fine. But there are so many more options that didn't used to exist these days, be that in legal tech, be that in kind of... So usually I think a lot of people end up going in-house. I know a lot of people who've completely switched careers to go be a part of startups, because the career is so transferable. The skills we learn, it's client relationship, it's commercial awareness, it's communication, it's attention to detail. I think these are the core skills and, the things that trainees build over the years, and any lawyer will have, any good lawyer will have. And you can take that into any profession, and it is quite transferable. So I know lawyers who've left to start their startups, help their friends, continue build on their startups. It doesn't have to be legal related roles either anymore. I think they're going into commercial roles. They go into consultancy. They can go into finance. Quite a few of them have been moving on to private equity houses, go into trading. So because we have the commercial side and we have the lawyer side, so it's great. You kind of have a foot in kind of if you want to pursue finance or if you want to just go all law, whichever. And sometimes people go back to learn more. There's so much more to learn. You can go do an LLM, you can study more and go become professors. And, we have someone from my firm came to visit the other day, and he's like I don't want to say prime minister, but he's quite big. He's like in politics in a country, and he was he's the head of the opposition party or something in a country in Africa. And he was literally like a trainee at our firm. We have someone from Sri Lanka who's like that. Actually, he was a corporate lawyer in a big firm here. He's gone back to Sri Lanka, and he does kind of like LGBTQ based advocacy and that kind of law and campaigning, and it's very cool. So I think the world's your oyster is what I like to believe.
Yeah.
I am here to explore, train, kind of get the best training that I can, get an international perspective, and then I will see where we go from there.
Sir Keir Starmer was a barrister. Dominic Raab, I think, was at Linklaters, right?
Facts.
So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Great. I feel like we're at a natural conclusion point. Do you have any resources, any last minute advice for somebody in high school, in first year of uni?
Yeah.
One or two things that you have, just any last minute advice
Right.
for someone who wants to get in.
Sure. It is competitive. The London legal market is very competitive, and that can seem very daunting, stressful, kind of isolated, as everyone is applying and you feel like you're all pitted against each other. And if that feeling does arise, there is plenty of support. There are a lot of networks out there that are focused on mentorship, on assisting you getting a career, breaking into law. And seek those out, seek those support systems out if you feel like you could use that additional kind of extra perspective, value add, whatever it may be. Make sure you seek those resources out and you're not kind of alone in this process. I'd say find a mentor. I think that's always so useful. And that doesn't have to be someone in the legal industry, but it's always good to have an experienced perspective, especially if you're an international student and you're kind of in this whole new world of trying to live abroad, break into here culturally, and then also find a career. I definitely recommend speaking to people generally, or if you want to pursue finding a mentor.
Did you find a mentor?
I had a couple of people at university who have had training contracts at the firms I was applying to, which was a great starting point. And then uni had a scheme. They'd pair us up with people. At my firm currently, I'm part of a women's network, and I find these to be super kind of value add for me in terms of navigating, what can I expect in 5 years and what should I be thinking about that I don't know yet, Resources plenty, starting from Chamber Student that we mentioned earlier. There's a new one which I really like, and I think it's very valuable. It's called the Corporate Law Academy, and it breaks down, specifically focused on corporate law, has loads of insights, has its own kind of, like student room for like universities and stuff. It has kind of a corporate law focused kind of chat board on there with lots of future applicants. They offer like an application review service. You can do mock interviews, and I think if you are also looking for mentorship, the RAN network is really good. We have aspiring solicitors. We have I'm trying to think, there's loads.
Some good books too, right? Like the City Career series.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. The City Career series is like everyone's go-to for commercial awareness and like how to navigate this buzzword and how to build your commercial awareness. Those are the ones off the top of my head, but I can leave a list of resources with you guys to like publish whenever you guys want to, or if you want to put something out there for people.
So we have one question that we like to ask our guests in the end of the podcast. Where do you see yourself in 20 years in the future?
I'm trying to break away from my type A personality of like making intensive plans, but an area I'm really passionate about and have been since Manu and I did geography way back when in school is kind of the environment, ESG. Environmental law was something I studied at university, and even in my interview for this job, it was something I expressed has been my interest. I think inevitably climate change is going to get ahead of all of us, and we will need to restructure the way we live to, work with and do our part. And my whole I had a bit of a utilitarian perspective of entering corporate law in terms of I wanted to merge my two interests and kind of get into green finance. So that is where I hopefully see myself in 20 years, where currently I think the approach is very, very kind of surface level, very forward looking. It's not very tangible or enforced. And I'm hoping that can change. And we're not using green finance as a buzzword and not just, incorporating renewable goals in like the finance world just for namesake or for a PR kind of purpose. And it's actually tangible and has an impact on the planet as a whole. So I think kind of bringing two very diametrically opposed worlds together and pursuing something in that path is hopefully the plan.
That sounds super great. All right.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Divya.
Thanks for having me.
This has been really useful, and I'm sure that... Is there anything that you want to plug at the end?
Oh, wow.
Is there anything?
It has been an information overload, and I understand it's just so much to process. I am genuinely available. Add me on anything, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, whatever, and I'm always happy to help anyone who needs any guidance with respect to navigating this industry. So, that's all I have to say. And if anything was unclear, anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm here to answer them. And yeah, I'm just around in general.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we take a Polaroid at the end of every episode.
Oh, wow.
The cameras do roll usually.
What's the score?
I don't think much has changed for you.
We're terrible.